Which gets us to the other problem of NAMA, which is that by doing that, you just double up moral hazard. We're still paying for the last bank crisis in Ireland, AIB's adventures in insurance land. Everybody here who has an insurance policy is paying for that still. It was very clear to AIB then what to do, which was to take the losses and move on. The government decided to bail them out. Gareth Fitzgerald, in fact, which gives me great credence in his ability to manage banking crises. Last time didn't work out terribly well, because it injected moral hazard. Moral hazard is basically where you allow organisations to get away with the consequences of their actions. If we do this, we are saying to the shareholders, me, all those shares you thought were worthless, you know what? Here's some taxpayers' money. We're sorry for all the bad times over the last 18 months. What it comes down to is basically the equivalent of me going around with a whip around, a dig out, perhaps, as a former Prime Minister might say. It's one thing for you to give me money. If I say I've got all these AIB shares at 278, and you say, well, long-term economic value of those is about a tenner, and you pay for them, I'm going to go, absolutely. That's fine on a voluntary basis. But if the revenue commissioners and the power of the state say you will pay Brian Lucey and every other Brian Lucey more than these shares are worth now, and you have no choice, it is a matter of state compulsion to do so, I think that's morally wrong as well as injecting moral hazard. Because there is no incentive then on the Irish shareholders, or on the bank's shareholders, to actually exercise their duties as shareholders, which is to, as the principals, the owners of the company, to manage the agents they have put in charge, the boards of the banks, to do the job right, and to ensure that in the long term, there's a sustainable, long-term growth path for the company. So we're injecting double doses of moral hazard. Now, the state have set their face against nationalisation. We've heard a series of increasingly bizarre arguments as to why you can't nationalise. Every single one of those has been knocked down by academics, bond traders, international financiers. We can't nationalise the banks because, let me see, oh yes, we couldn't get funding, that was it, in the interbank markets. IrishEconomy.ie is full of bond traders who go, no, we wouldn't see that. And some of them even post under their own names. Well, actually, we couldn't nationalise because nationalisation removes, we were told last week, removes the oversight, that's it, the oversight that the markets offer, which is valuable. Well, that was so good, it worked really well the last 5 years, didn't it? And ignores the fact that, of course, all of the evidence is that it's the bond markets of companies that actually are more effective at monitoring companies' activities than stock markets. And they give the information to the stock markets. And as we will still have traded bonds issued by the Irish banks to fund their activities, even in a nationalised situation, in the same way as you've traded bonds issued by the EPSP, that monitoring function can continue. So, the solution, unfortunately, to me, is a pure capitalistic solution. And this is talking against myself. I've lost significant tens of thousands in the banks. That's life. That's capitalism. You know, that's, don't cry for me, Argentina. That's the way it is. Force the banks to take the losses. Whether that's through NAMA or through going out and selling the loan books on the international markets, which is possible. There are hedge funds all around the world popping back up, having laid low for 18 to 20 months, buying distressed loans and paying for them. 20, 30 cents on the euro. The banks would then take the losses up front, take it like a man, and then they would have to get capital. One of the arguments against nationalisation was, well, if you nationalise, well, there's no exit strategy there, is there? Sure, you can never sell a nationalised company, never, anywhere. Maybe not in Ireland, where we have the memories of Aircom, but one of my co-authors is a world expert in privatisation. I'm sure Bill Megginson, for basically coffee and donuts, would come and tell the government how to structure a denationalisation plan. Here's a simple one. You nationalise. You force the banks to take the losses. NAMA pays no more than market value, plus maybe 10%, just in case. Small amount. That's about 35 billion. They're then sitting on losses. They're wiped out. There's no easy way out of this for the taxpayer, unfortunately. But if you nationalise, if you end up in a situation where, as a consequence of forcing capitalism to work, you have to revert for the moment to state control, then you've got two pots of money. On the one hand, we've got the 35 billion you've paid to clean the banks. And then you've got about another 30 billion you've got to put in to recapitalise the banks. So all of these things end up costing about the same, unfortunately. The difference is, on the one side, you've got an asset. The Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce has said it wants 25% of the Irish banking market. Interestingly, Alan Ahern, I think, in an incredibly dangerous statement on Saturday said, we need Irish banks for Irish people. I mean, for a senior government economic advisor to say that is, to my mind, frightening. Anybody with a notion of economic history remembers the autarchical anti-foreigner policies that drove this country literally to the point of extinction by 1957. T.K. Whitaker must have double-faced palmed when he heard that. What? The most fundamental gain of globalisation is you share risk. Now, there's lots of downsides. But to go back to Irish banks for Irish people is, what's next? Burn everything British but their coal? We heard that one before, and that worked so well. Let's have a land war. Oh no, sorry, we lost that one. So,
land war, yes.
Yeah, well, not the one I'm thinking of. By the way, we defaulted on our national debt in the annuities, and we were a bit back in the international markets in 5 years. I'm not saying we should do that, but these aren't unalloyed. If we end up having to nationalise the banks, we do that incredibly reluctantly. We do that because the banks have failed. But guess what, people? They have failed. And I should not be given a dig out. I shouldn't. I failed in my duties as a shareholder to exercise control, because I probably would have been listened to more than a randomer from the AGM, and I didn't do it. Nor did others. So you know what? Let us take the consequences. Every single solution that's out there proposes whatever it does and ends up with a cleaned up banking system. So does forcing the banks to take losses. That's capitalism. The state coming in and saying, right, October bank holiday weekend, we now have a banking system. Oh crap, what do we do with it? I'm sure the Canadian Embassy could give you the phone number. Mr. Lenihan, of the chairman of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, would be happy for probably about 10 billion, which they could pay literally by a cheque, to take 25% stakes in all the banks. Okay, it's only costing us 25 now. What do we do? What next? Okay, let's have a trust. Let's transfer these over to a trust. Constantine will talk about this more. And let's have that trust in the name of the Irish people. And let's do some sort of voucher-based reprivatisation over a 5 to 7 year period for half of the bank. And the other 25%, we just need some cash, so we'll sell that in an IPO 5 or 7 years down the line. This is not rocket science. This does not require the state to engage in vast amounts of speculative activity. What does require the state to engage in vast amounts of speculative activity with your money in mind is to grossly overpay, to mark to hope on the assumption that, and we see from Ronan's fairly simple models. I'm sure the ESRI and the Department of Finance have more complex models that probably come up with pretty much the same results, that there's no easy way out of this for the next 2 or 3 years. But of course we're told that the market has already turned, at least in Frank Fahey's mind. I keep going back to Frank Fahey because he's an exemplar of the problem, and I'm sure he's a lovely guy in person. This is the kind of thinking, boiled down to sound bites, that is driving the government. So, why pay more? Pay what you have to, force the losses. NAMA can work, of course NAMA can work. Almost anything can work if you throw enough money at it. But we're throwing taxpayers' money into an incredibly uncertain situation, hoping that we will end up in a better place, while in our hearts knowing we won't. But for ideological reasons, doing so And to me, as a taxpayer and as a citizen, that is immoral and wrong. And as an economist, it horrifies me what we are doing. Thank you.